Hey guys, how you going? My name is Dom and in today's video we're going to be building a to-do list using Svelte. Okay, so the purpose of today's project is going to be to combine the knowledge that was learnt in the previous Svelte tutorials into a single project. Okay, so there's going to be certain design decisions which are made, such as using stores, that I typically wouldn't make for a small app like this, and the reason is because you want to be able to, like I said, make use of many of the previously covered topics in a single project to see how the different components of Svelte combine together to, of course, create something tangible. So hope you guys enjoy, and I'll see you at the end. Okay, so the first step here is going to be to include the Uid package, because we're going to be using unique identifiers for each one of the to-do list items. Okay, so going inside here, we can just say inside the project directory, npm install and then uid -- save-dev. So now, of course, it is going to include that package, and once this is done, we can just say npm run dev just like this. Okay, so now heading inside the browser on port 5000 will of course give us the application right there. So now we can begin work on the actual to-do list. Okay, so just a quick rundown of what's actually going to be happening. Essentially, inside the app.svelte right here, we're going to be having two main components. We're going to be having the header and also the actual list itself. Okay, so of course inside the header we're going to have the things like the list name as well as the number of completed items, and inside the list it's of course going to contain the input field to of course create a new item as well as list each individual item themselves. Okay, so quite straightforward. We're also going to be using a fake API which of course just uses local storage to save the items. So of course, if you want to expand on this project and use your own API, you can do so very easily. So with all that being said, let's go inside here and begin on the actual project itself. Okay, so the first thing to do is going to be to set up this app.svelte. So inside the HTML right down here, we can make a new div with a class of container. This will be the main container for the application itself. Okay, so we're going to be having both the header and the list inside here. Let's just add some sample text inside the div itself, then go inside the style tag and we can apply some basic styles. So I'm going to try to do each component one by one from start to finish. That includes the CSS and things like that. I think that's probably the best way to go about this. So let's go inside here and just say a class of container. We can say width of 500px right here and a background of #009579 for the decode green color. And now we can target global and we can say everything inside the container. We're going to set a font family of sans serif. Okay, so now saving this right here is going to give us something like this in the browser, and we can see it's all working perfectly fine so far. So now let's work on the actual header. So going inside the directory right here, let's make a new directory for components. And of course, inside this directory, we're going to store all of the individual components, which of course get included by the app itself. So inside here, let's make a new header.svelte, and inside the header.svelte, we can first just leave this script tag empty. We're going to get back to this very shortly, but inside the styles, we can also keep this empty just for now. And inside the HTML, we can just say a new div with a class of header, and this will contain two spans. The first span is going to just say the actual list name. So for example, we can say Dom's to-do list. Okay. Inside the second span, this will be our completed item count. So we can just say, for example, right here, 0 out of 0. We're going to be changing these to be actual variables very shortly. We can now just do a bit of CSS to make it look nice. So we can target the header, and we can say a display of flex right here. We can say a justify content of space between, and align items of center. Okay, so this right here is going to give us a vertical censoring, and of course justify content is going to make sure that the span right here, the list name, is going to be on the left side, and the actual counts are going to be on the right side. We can say a padding of 15px top and bottom and 20px left and right, and a color of white, as well as a font weight of bold, and we can also say right here a font size of 1.5 EM. And lastly, let's add a background of RGBA 000, then 0.1. So basically, this background color is going to inherit from the green set here, and just make it slightly darker. That way, this one color is going to control the whole application. So saving this right here and going inside the browser is of course going to give us nothing because we haven't actually included the header. So going inside the app.svelte, let's just import right up here, import header from /components and then header.svelte. We can now quite simply go inside these the div right here, and we can just say header just like this. And we may as well also just add some more sample text just to see the difference inside the actual container. So saving this is going to give us something like this. As we can see, the header is coming along quite nicely. So we can see that difference in color right there between, of course, the rest of the body and the actual header. So now let's work on actually getting some data inside a store. Okay, so like I mentioned before, we're going to be using a writable store to store an array of items. Okay, so going inside the source directory, let's make a new file right here called stores.js. And inside here, we're going to firstly import from svelte/store, we're going to import the writable function. So now we can just simply say export const items equals a new writable store, and it's going to have a default value of an array right here. So now each one of our components, if they need to, they can access the actual list of items using this store. And we're going to see how this works very shortly, but I actually want to put some data inside here just to see how we can use it alongside the actual header. So for example, let's put some sample items. We can just say first up an ID of 1. The actual text can be something like take out the bins, and we can say right here for complete. Let's make it completed. Okay, so completed is going to be the boolean, and it's going to be, for example, false. Let's do the same thing a couple more times. We can just say 2 here. And we can say something like go to school and make this true. Okay, so now of course we have 2 items right here. So now we can just save this and then go inside the header, and we're going to make use of that store. So in the header, let's first import the actual store itself. So we can say import right here, and we can say items from /store.js. So now of course we have the actual items themselves. Okay, so we can now just, for example, we can just say console.log and say $items to of course access from that store. So now saving this right here, going inside the browser, we get right here in the console, we get those 2 items. So of course we have the first item and the second item right there. Okay, so now we're going to be using these items right here in order to populate our completed count in the top right corner. So going back inside here, we can just essentially use reactivity right here to just say $, then we can say item count is equal to items.length. So essentially using this $sign right here is of course going to update whenever the items changes. Okay, so essentially when new items get added or removed from the store, it's going to update this item count automatically. We can also say right here another one, and we can say completed item count is equal to right here items.filter. We can grab the actual item itself, so each individual item itself, and we can just say essentially we're going to keep the item if it is completed. So we can say right here item.completed. Okay, then we can say .length to of course grab that count. So now of course the same story here. Whenever the items update from the store, it's going to recalculate this value right here. So now we can simply put these two variables inside our span right here, and we can just say first up completed item count. Then we can say / if I just make this a bit lower so we can see. So completed item count / and then of course we can just say item count. Okay, so now saving this right here, we can see that we get in the browser 1 out of 2 items are completed. And that's all working perfectly fine. And that's actually all it is when it comes to the header. So we can close the header off. We are done with that one. So now we can move on to actually creating the actual list component itself. Okay, so going inside the components directory right here, let's make a new file called list.svelte. And inside here, might just leave it empty just for now. I might actually just say, for example, something like I am the list, just to see how it works inside the app.svelte. Okay, so let's go back inside the app.svelte, and we can now import the list right here. So of course import list from components, then list.svelte. Okay, and now we can simply just say right here list, and we are done. So now saving this is of course going to give us this right here, and we can now close off the app.svelte. We are done with this one. So moving on to the list itself. So this one is probably going to be one of the main components, as well as of course the actual individual items themselves. So when it comes to the list, we're going to firstly grab or create a new script tag right here, and we're going to import on mount. Okay, so we can say import right here, import from Svelte. I'm going to import on mount to of course essentially, you know, when the list gets mounted, we're going to of course retrieve the items from the API. So we're going to see how that works very shortly, but for now let's just import the on mount, and then we can go down here. We can create a few functions. Okay, so the first one here is going to be function handle new item, and it's going to take in an event object right here. So we're going to see how these functions work shortly, but for now let's just keep them right here just for a bit of just a few templates just to see how it's all going to work. So we can make a new one for handle update, also taking through an event object right here, and lastly we can say handle delete. Okay, so all of these three functions right here are going to be triggered by either the new item component to of course add a new item, or each individual item themselves inside the list. So like I said, we're going to be seeing how this works shortly. We can create a new one here, or a new line of code for on mount. So inside the on mount, we're going to be running this function right here. So we're going to make this an asynchronous function. Okay, and inside here, essentially, we're going to be updating the store with the list of items. Okay, so basically, when the list loads up, and you know, once it gets mounted, it's going to call the API and grab our list of items and then insert them into the store. So with that being said, we can just leave a comment here for now, and we can say fetch from API. So now we're going to need to actually create some sort of class in order to fetch our items from local storage. So like I said, this store right here, these items are just samples. We're going to replace this very shortly with the actual API. So let's go inside the source directory once again, and we're going to make a new file called todoapi.js. So this one right here is going to be a simple class containing two static methods. One to get all the items and one to save the items. Okay, so that being said, let's export a default class called todoAPI. Inside here, like I said, two static methods. We're going to say static async gets all. Okay, so static async gets all. Inside here, we're going to go to local storage to retrieve our items. So we can say right here, return json.parse. We're going to parse from local storage. We're going to say local storage.getItem, then say, for example, or as the key, to-do-list. If there are no local storage items, so basically, if this is your first time loading the application up, we can just say or, then pass an empty JSON array. Quite straightforward. And because this right here is going to be async, it's going to, of course, automatically return a promise by default. Okay? And for the second one, we can just say static async, then save. This right here is going to take through all of the items to save. So right here we can just say items, and then we can just say local storage.set item. We can set the to-do list right here as the key, of course using the same one as right up here. And for the data, we can say json.stringify, and we can store the items as JSON right there. So this is going to be our basic API for the to-do list. So now saving this right here, let's go inside the actual stores, and we can just essentially make this empty as it should be, so an empty store. And we're going to be updating this through the list itself. So inside the onMount, we're going to call the API. So we can just quite simply import right up here, import to-do API from /to-do API.js. And then we can just say right down here, essentially just, you know what, actually, we need to actually include the store. So let's go up here and we can say import. I'm going to import the items store from /stores.js. So now we can quite simply just say right here, items is equal to await to-do API dot get all. Okay, so now if I save this right here and go inside the browser, let's just check for errors real quick. We're all good. So inside the browser, we get this right here. We get 0 out of 0. If I was to go inside the application tab right here of the Chrome DevTools, go into local storage, I can, if I want to, I can actually create a new key, I believe, right here. So we can say add new. Let's add a new key. We're going to say to-do list as the key, and for the value, we're just going to pass in just a JSON string. So we can say right here, just creating a fake item. Inside here, we can just say ID is going to be 1. We can say text equal to something like learn Svelte. And we can say for the last one here, completed is equal to false. So I'll just put strings around these property names. Okay, so text and completed is going to be false. So now if I was to hit enter here, then refresh the page, we can see we get right here one item inside the list. So we can see it's of course grabbing from local storage right there, and the API is working perfectly fine. Just to verify one more time, let's just console.log the list of items once we've actually retrieved them. So saving this, we get right here the list of items right there. So all that being said, we are ready to move on to the rest of the code for the to-do list. So the next step here is going to be just to start working on the actual items themselves. Okay, so I might just apply some styles to the list. So let's target the style right here, and you know what? Let's actually create a component or an actual element first. So let's go down here, and we can make a new div called list right here with the class of list, and inside here, essentially we can just we can loop through our items. Okay, so we can say right down here a new each. Okay, we're going to say right here each item as each item. So each item's right here as item keyed by the item object itself. We can now say essentially, let's just output the actual item. So just for demonstration, we're going to output the item. We're going to replace this shortly with an actual component, but for now, let's output that item itself. This might need to be JSON stringified to make it visible, but let's see how that goes. And essentially, if there are no items, so else right here, if there are no items, then we need to just say new p with a class of list-status. Inside here, we can just say no items exist. And then let's just save this, go inside the browser, and we get something like this. Of course, we get our individual item that is outputted. If I was to make the items array empty, we should get right here, no items exist. So there we go. So now let's style up the actual elements. So inside the style, let's target the list, and we're going to say padding here of 15px. For the list-status, we can just say a margin of 0, a text align of center, a color of white right here, and a font weight of bold, as well as a font size of 1.1 em, just to make it a slight bit bigger. Let's also create the empty array just for testing purposes. Once again, save this and we get this right here. Perfect. Okay, so let's put this back to normal. And we are basically done with the actual styling of the list. Okay, so now let's move on to displaying each individual item inside its own components. Okay, so going inside the components directory, let's make a new file for item.svelte. So inside this item.svelte, essentially it's going to be just a text input as well as a checkbox. Okay, so let's first create the script tag right here, and this is going to take in individual properties of each item. So we can say export let id text and completed. Okay, so right there. So of course, as the list loops through each item, it's going to create the new instance of the item right here, and of course pass through each property. Okay, so now let's go down to the HTML, just create the style tag real quick. Let's go down to the HTML, and for this one, we're going to essentially have a main wrapper for the item. So we're going to say right here, a new div with a class of item. Okay, and inside here, we can just say input, okay, and with a type of text, and also a class of, let's just do text-input. Okay, so we're going to be binding the value of the actual input with the text property right up here. So we can just say bind value equal to text right here. Okay, now we're going to be making essentially the item read only if the item is complete. Okay, so we don't want users to be able to edit the item if it is complete. So we can say right here, read only is going to be true if the item is completed right there. Okay, now we're going to be adding a few more things to the input itself very shortly, but for now, I just want to keep it basic just like this. And for the actual checkbox, we can just say a new input right here with a type of checkbox. And of course, this one is going to be the completed yes or no. So let's give this a class of complete or completed dash checkbox. Okay. And for this one, we can simply bind the checked property to the completed property right there to, of course, make sure that the data stays in sync with whatever the user has chosen. So now let's just save this right here, and let's go inside the browser. Of course, we have no changes. So let's import the item into the actual list.svelte. So we can just say right here, import item from /item.svelte. We can now simply go inside the for loop here, and we can say item. Then using this spread-like syntax, we can just say right inside here, item, and this right here is basically just going to grab each property of the individual item, so of course the ID, the text, and the completed boolean, and then pass it into our properties right up here. So now Let's close this off and save this, and we get something like this in the browser. Of course, the input and the checkbox right here. So I might just apply some CSS styles to the actual text box and checkbox before continuing with the actual code. So let's go inside here and apply some styles. So we're going to be targeting the item itself firstly. We're going to say a display of flex and an align items of center, some padding of 15px and a background of white. Okay, we can then say item, then focus within. So basically, whenever there is focus on the input field itself, we're going to apply a different background color to the item just to see, get some user feedback. So we can say background and make this RGBA 255, 255, 255, and then 0.8 for a mostly white background with the green coming through. We can then say right down here, targeting the text input, we can just say a flex grow of 1. So basically, using flexbox right up here, this will ensure that the actual input is going to take up the remaining space of the horizontal row. Okay, we can have a background here of none, as well as a border of none, and an outline also of none. Let's have a font weight here of, let's just do 500, okay, and a font size of 1 EM, just to make it the default font size of the browser, okay. When it comes to the completed checkbox, we can just say right here, completed checkbox, let's add a margin left of 15px to make it a bit spaced out compared to the actual text input. So now saving this is going to give us something like this. As we can see, we are getting close to the final product. Okay, so I want to touch on the completed items once again. Okay, so going back inside here, as we know, when the item is completed like this, for example, this right here is not editable. It is now read only. So something like this. Okay, so going back inside here, let's take it a step further. So when the item is completed, I actually want essentially the item to be grayed out as well as a strike through the actual input fields. Okay, so to achieve that, let's add a class right here, then colon completed. So basically, whenever the item is completed, right up here inside the prop, of course, bounded to the input field of checkbox, whenever the item is completed, it's going to add a completed class to the item container itself. So, that being said, let's go up here, and we're going to say item.completed. Let's set a background here of a light gray, being triple D right here. And then we can just say item.completed and target the text input. And we're going to say for the text input itself, let's add a color of just a bit of a darker gray. So 555 will do perfectly fine for that. And a text decoration of line through. So now, saving this right here, going inside the browser, now we can see we get the gray background and also the actual line through the text. So that is all, just a bit of a nice touch to, of course, that completed status. Okay, so let's move on now to adding the event handlers on the items and of course communicating back up to the list whenever an item changes. Okay, so like I said, these functions right here are going to be essentially triggered by, or actually my mistake, these two right here, so handle update and handle delete, are going to be triggered by the list items. Okay, so with that being said, let's go down here into the item, and we can say right here on, and we can say on update. So on update, we're going to run the handle update function. On delete, okay, we're going to run the handle delete. So basically, like I said, this item is going to fire these events up using an event dispatcher. It's going to fire events up from the item into the list to, of course, say the item has been updated or deleted. So now, let's trigger these events from the input itself. So, to achieve that, let's go up here and we can firstly just import right up here, let's import from Svelte the create event dispatcher. Okay, and then we can make a new event dispatcher. We can say const dispatch is equal to create event dispatcher. Okay, so this event dispatcher is going to give us the ability to fire events from the component right here up to the list. Okay, so let's make a function called trigger update. Okay, so whenever the trigger update function is called, we're going to fire up and say there has been an update. So we can say dispatch right here. We can dispatch the update event, and we can pass through as data each one of our properties right up here. We can just say ID, text, and completed. Okay, so now whenever this function runs, this on update is going to be triggered, and of course we're going to run this handle update right here, and inside the handle update we're going to have access to the event object, which of course contains the information which was set right here. So now it's going to be about grabbing the events from the minimize CSS. So it's going to be about now grabbing the events from the input fields themselves, and then of course triggering this function. So to achieve that, let's go down here, and we're going to say right down here, we're going to say on : key up for the input field. Okay, when a key is pressed upwards from the actual input field, we're going to run this function. Okay, so this function is going to grab the key and the target from the event. Okay, so this right here is using object destructuring. So of course, when this event fires off, this will give us an event object right here, as per usual. So I'm just simply grabbing out from the event object the key and the target. Okay, so the key and the target right here. Okay, so now inside here we're going to check if the key that was pressed is the enter key. So we're going to say key is equal to enter. If that's the case, we can just say and then target.blur. So what's happening here is essentially, if I just save this and go inside the browser once again, if I was to now press, for example, I can say dcode. If I press enter, we can see we lose focus, or we blur from the input field. I can say enter and we lose focus right there. So that is the purpose of this. So now we can have an event for when the input field gets blurred or loses focus, we can then fire up to the actual list with an update. So right down here, we can just say on : blur. When it gets blurred, we're going to quite simply say inside here in this handler, trigger update. To of course trigger that update. Okay, that is it for the actual input. So now let's go inside list.svelte, and we're going to say right here console.log updating item. Okay, let's save this, go inside the browser, and now we can just say enter, and we get updating item right here. If I was to log out the actual event object itself, so being E, save this, we get right here the events containing inside detail, completed, ID, and text for the updated text. If I was to, of course, make this something like learn JavaScript from dcode, for example, press enter, this time, of course, we get inside the detail, learn JavaScript from dcode. So that is how the events are going to work for the actual to-do list items. Okay, so that being said, let's add one also for the actual for the completed checkbox. Okay, so basically whenever the checkbox gets checked or unchecked, we're going to want to fire off the same event. Okay, so back inside here, we're just going to say inside the item, let's just say right here on : change. Okay, on change, let me just save this and get on a new line if we can. So on change, we can just say right inside here, trigger update. Save this, there we go. So right here we have, of course, on change, we're going to trigger the update, of course, whenever the checkbox gets changed. So let's save this, check it, and we can see we get the same event coming through. So now, when it comes to deleting the actual items, this is going to work on a double click. So basically, whenever I double click the item, we're going to fire off a delete event. Okay, so back inside here, let's go inside the actual div item right here, and we're going to say on double click. Okay, we're going to run a function called handle double click. Okay, so now let's define this function right up here. So function handle double click, and inside here we're going to simply do a basic JavaScript prompt window. So we're going to say right here const yes is equal to confirm, and we're going to say, are you sure you wish to delete this item? Okay, so if that is a yes from the user, then we're going to simply just say dispatch, then we can say delete right here to dispatch the delete event. And we're going to pass through as the detail just the ID. So save this, go back inside the list.svelte, and we can say right here inside the handle delete, we can just say once again console.log and log out the E right there. So saving this and going inside the browser once again, double clicking will give us this prompt. I can now say OK, and it's going to fire off the delete event from the actual item. Okay, so that is basically all we need to do when it comes to the item itself. So now we can close off this this item component. So now let's move on to, of course, doing the actual list component, or of course finishing this one off. So inside the handle update, we're going to do, we're essentially going to then call the API. So the first thing to do inside the handle update is going to be to update the store of items with the new entry. So essentially we're going to be using the spread syntax to achieve this. So we can say right here items, using a $, of course, for the store. We can say items is equal to, right here, we can now specify a new object. And we're going to say for the ID of the, my mistake, sorry, that was a different part of the code. Let's get rid of all of this, I apologize. Inside the handle update, we need to, of course, update the item with the same ID as the one that was set inside here from the event. Okay, so let's try again. The first thing to do is going to be to grab the index or the array index of the target item inside the store. So we can say const index is equal to items.find index. Okay, we're going to grab the item itself, and then we're going to check if the item.id is equal to the ID of the item being updated. So we can say e.detail.id. Remember, detail refers to the object right here being passed through. So we can say e.detail.id to, of course, grab that, and then we now have the index of the actual item. So now it's going to be quite straightforward. We can just say items with the store once again at this index is equal to the new object. We can just say e.detail, and then we can update the API and save the items. So we can say to do API.save and then pass through the items from the store. So now, of course, we've updated the store as well as committed the items to the actual API. So now, saving this right here, going inside the browser, let's open up the application tab and watch our local storage value. Okay, so right here we can just say learn. Let's just do learn JavaScript instead of Svelte. Press enter, and we get right here an update, and now it says learn JavaScript for, of course, the actual storage item. That's all working perfectly fine. Okay, let's move on to the handle delete. Okay, so for the deletion of an item, we can quite simply, it's going to be a lot simpler. So we're going to simply say right here items is equal to, and then we can say items.filter. So we're going to be making use of filter once again. This time we're essentially going to keep any items which are not the item which you want to delete. Okay, so we can say items.filter we can grab the item and we can say item.id does not equal e.detail. Remember, this time e.detail refers to the actual item itself, so the item ID itself. So right here we get ID, and of course ID then gets put into this right here. So basically, keep all the items which don't have the ID of the one you are trying to delete. And then we can just say right here, to do API, once again, .save, and then of course pass through the items right there. So saving this, going inside the browser, I might just make a copy of the value just to actually, restore it. So I'll copy this value, then I can just double click and I can say delete, and we can see right there, it has cleared the local storage list. Let's add this back. Okay, refresh, and we are now good to go. And that is the handle update and the handle delete functions complete. So now let's move on to handling a new item creation. But first, I just want to essentially just I want to sort this list by their completed status. But you know what? On second thought, maybe it's better to do that later on. So I'll leave that for now, and we'll get back to it once we've actually completed the new item input. Okay, so to allow users to add a new item, we're going to be having an input field right up here to of course do so. So going inside the components, let's make a new file called newitem.svelte. Okay, and inside here, it's going to be fairly simple. So we're going to have, of course, our script tag as well as our style tag. Okay, and we can start on the HTML. So we can say right here a new input field with a type of text, and this will be the only element inside the component. So we can say input type of text, and we can say on key up. So basically, whenever key gets pressed and gets lifted, we're going to do right here handle key up. We're going to be firing the handle key up function. We can also say right here as the placeholder text, and we're going to say plus add item. Okay, so now we can just quickly define this function for handle key up, and we can just say right here, just for now, console.log key up. Okay, and then let's just go inside the list.svelte and of course include the new item component. So we can say import new item from /new item.svelte. Let's save this and go inside the browser, and we can see, of course, we get nothing. Let's go back inside here and try again. Let's include right down here, let's include the new item component right before the actual list or the array. So saving this and going back inside here, we now get something like this. So of course now if I was to do a key up event, we're going to get this right here in the console. So where it's going to work is essentially we're going to be having a value assigned to the new item. So we can make a new variable right here. We can say let value equal to an empty string by default. So of course this will be the actual new item text which the user is going to input. Okay, so we can now say right down here, we can say bind :value. So of course, because we're not specifying an actual value, this is going to essentially see this, and it's going to say value and then value, and of course match those up. So now if I was to update the text itself, it's going to also update this value variable. Okay, so basically we're going to say right here in the function handle key up, we're going to say if I just grab once again the key from the event, okay, using object destructuring, we're going to say if key does not equal enter. Okay, so if the key is not enter, or the length of the value, okay, is equal to 0, then we're going to simply skip everything and just return. So I might just put this value a little higher just for a bit of clarity. Okay. So basically, if they entered nothing or they don't press enter, then we're going to do nothing, and instead, if they press enter and they've actually got a value, then we're going to say dispatch event. So my mistake, we need to include the event dispatcher. So let's try again. Let's import right up here import from Svelte the create event dispatcher. So now, once again, creating a new dispatcher, we can say const dispatch is equal to create event dispatcher right down here. And now we can just do inside the function dispatch. We're going to dispatch an event to say new item. Okay. And the actual value is going to be the value which was set by the user through the input field. And then we can just simply reset that value back to an empty string. So now we are basically done when it comes to the code for the new item, aside from of course the CSS. But we're going to get to the CSS later on. Let's just save this and go inside list.svelte. And now we're going to go inside here and we're going to say essentially on new item. We're going to say right down here, handle new item, once again in a similar format to what we've done with the handle update and the handle delete. So now inside the handle new item, we can just say console.log, then pass through here e. So now saving this and going inside the browser, we can now see if I was to type in something like, let's just do learn Svelte, okay, press enter. We get right here a new custom event, of course this time containing the detail, going to be our actual list item name. Okay, so now let's just finish off the CSS and get that over and done with for the add item before moving back to the list to of course add that item to the API. So going back inside here, let's just go inside the CSS and we can just say for the input field itself, it's going to be a bit of a long one. So I'm going to say box sizing of a border box, a margin bottom of 15px, some padding of also 15px, a border of none, an outline of none, a width of 100% to of course take up the remaining space, and a background of RGBA 000, and then 0.25 for a 25% opaque background, of course, once again allowing the green to seep through. We can say color, set this to be white, okay, just like that. A font weight of bold, okay, and a font size of 1 EM, and then lastly a cursor of point. So all of these are quite self-explanatory CSS rules. So we can also say right here for the input colon placeholder, we're going to set the color to be white also. Okay, so now saving this right here, going inside the browser once again, we now get something like this. So it's all looking quite nice. So we are done with the actual new item component. We can close this one off. So we are almost done with the entire to-do list. So moving back to the handle new item function, this one right here is going to work by simply reassigning the value of the store items. So we can say items is equal to right here new array, and this one is going to use, like I said previously, the spread syntax. So we can say right here, adding a new object, we're going to say an ID of, and this is where we're going to use the Uid module. So let's import right up here, import from Uid, I believe it is going to be right here, v4 as Uid, and then v4. Okay, and we can just remove this app import. That was a bit of a mistake, but now we can just say right here Uid v4 to of course create our new unique identifier, and then we can say right here our text. Okay, this will come from e.detail, of course detail being the actual text which we saw earlier, and the completed status is of course going to default to be false for new tasks. And then we can just say ... okay, then say items to essentially append the rest of the existing items to the end. So basically it's gonna this right here is going to be pushing a new item to the beginning of the array, and of course leaving the rest at the bottom. So now it's going to be as simple as just doing once again to do API, and then we can say .save and then pass through here the items right there. So now we are done mostly with the to-do list. Let's save this, go back inside the browser, and we can now add a new item. We can just say, for example, learn HTML. Press enter, and it's working really nicely. Okay. We can now say, I don't know, something like play games. We can say take out the rubbish, and lastly we can just say something like let's do go to school once again. So now, of course, we have everything working perfectly fine. We can see the actual item count is working with reactivity, and if I was to check something, we can see, of course, the disabled and the actual completed false status is working perfectly fine. So the last step here is going to be a bit of a nice thing to have, and that is going to be essentially pushing all of the completed items to the bottom of the list. Okay, so to achieve that, let's go inside the list.svelte, and we're going to be creating a new variable which is going to react to whenever the list gets updated. So let's go inside here, and we're going to say let items sorted equal to an empty array. So basically, this right here is going to contain the items in a sorted fashion. Okay, so right here we can use reactivity, a reactive statement. Okay, and we can say right here essentially whenever the items get updated, we're going to essentially put them inside this array as a sorted in a sorted order. Okay, so we can say right here items sorted is equal to, then we can just say ... items right here to create a copy of the items from the store, and then we can simply use items sorted .sort, and inside the sort right here we're going to of course grab the A and the B, and we're going to write out this function. So basically, of course, with sort functions they need to return 0, 1 or -1. So right here we're going to say if A.completed and B.completed, then we're going to return 0. So basically a neutral status. We can now say if A.complete, then return 1. So of course a completed item is to be completed. So a completed item is going to go to the bottom of the list. Okay, and we can say if B completed, then we're going to return -1 to of course push that one back to the top of the list, being completed as well. Okay, so I'm not the best when it comes to these the actual sort method, so apologies if this right here could be simplified, but essentially it's going to work. So please let me know if you know a better way to write this one out. But saving this right here is of course going to give us nothing different. But if I go back inside here and I go inside the each right here, we can replace this with simply items sorted as the actual list to loop over. So now saving this and going inside the browser, we can now see all of the completed items are going to appear on the bottom, and if I was to untick it, it's going to also maintain its order. Okay, so that right there is how to create a to-do list using Svelte. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.